I am Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. Most folks know me with due to my day job, which is running Did It, a digital-first marketing agency that does everything from paid search and SEO on through programmatic and display. We have a big earned media division as well for digital PR, content marketing, et cetera. We even have a direct mail division at this point. I have a nonprofit called Giving Forward. I also co-founded and helped run. I'm lucky enough to be joined by Micahel Katz today. Micahel co-founded and runs mParticle, which is a CDP. Everyone needs an acronym for their business these days. Clearly, not all CDPs are created equal, and a lot of people don't even realize where the lines between CDPs and other sort of data repositories begin and end. And so I'd love you to sort of share the origin story for mParticle, and then sort of talk about where you see CDPs now and where they're going.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me, and good to see you. mParticle is the second company that I've co-founded along with my brother Andrew, who's our CTO, and the first one was in the ad tech space very directly, and I think what made us stand out, especially amongst a very crowded ecosystem of ad networks, was the data platform that we built. And our flagship data platform called Open Segment Manager allowed us to ingest first and third party data from a variety of sources and distill it to individual anonymous user profiles. So kind of fancy way of saying map whole bunch of first and third party data to cookie IDs. And a lot of the value that we were able to create was through the speed of execution. So rewind the clock to 2009 or so, when it took most of these data platforms a day or longer to be able to update their audience manifests and their targeting profiles. We were able to do it in about an hour or so. And so there was a speed or a time to value component of it. And we were able to help our customers just operationalize data better and faster. And so, we got bought by Yahoo, and there was a whole bunch of turnover during the year that I was there, and ended up leaving. But one of the things that I saw when I was at Yahoo was the kind of like the emergence of mobile and the infancy of connected TV. And I was running a moderately sized product team at the time, and anytime I had any questions about what users were doing across different platforms and touch points, once you got beyond the web, it was like this dark pool of data. Nobody had any answers. And so you'd actually have to submit a ticket to the help desk, and you'd get an email response from somebody, God knows where, with an answer like 2 weeks later. It's like, well, I stopped caring about that 12 days ago, and like the opportunity has kind of come and gone. And to me though, that was like the first aha moment that in this platform shift, there was this really nascent ecosystem. And at the time, we were on our like maybe second or third generation of tools. I could answer a lot of these questions on the web, but none of them had kind of made their way over to these new and emerging platforms. And so mParticle was it was a bet on the platform shift that was starting to occur. And we felt like if our experience in the ad tech space in like the mid 2000s would play out again and again across these other platforms, and not just limiting ourselves to ad tech, but just the shift creating new opportunity and investment, driving innovation, and ultimately fragmentation. We felt like that fragmentation was effectively like an emergent property of this platform shift, and there'd be a bunch of point solutions, and you would need to be able to aggregate those point solutions or integrate those point solutions. And we wanted to look beyond web technologies. So thinking not just about helping teams like build a faster horse, but build a car, right? And so what that meant was moving teams off of pixels and cookies and getting them towards more of a durable, scalable setup with respect to getting everything into a single API and creating integrations based on API connectivity and providing that layer of abstraction to simplify operationalizing data. And we had to make a few bets that we felt like if we were right along the way, we could build a really big company. And the early vision of mParticle was to be that modern data infrastructure. Like we didn't call it a CDP, we called it data automation. But it was all about tackling the fundamental change with respect to data, because across these platforms, it's new data types, new use cases. You couldn't conform to a web paradigm, and then being able to then map that to the ecosystem of tools that companies would use to help kind of like drive growth and drive efficiency. So that was the genesis of mParticle.
Cool. Well, I'd love to hear where you think things are going up until now, and I think it's perhaps started to change in the last couple of years, and maybe a little bit longer for the forward-thinking brands. But it's really almost like there were two sort of data warehouses or data stores. There was the data stores that had everything to do with the media and touch points that happened before the brand got a chance to engage. And then there was some back-end business intelligence platforms that the brand would run once they had an opportunity to touch the individual, especially once they had PII on them, right? And that the two rarely talked to each other. And yeah, sure, you could try to glue them together directly or with Zapier or something like that. But they really didn't. No one was really fully living that full customer life cycle that went out to the marketing touch points as well as talked about once you have them as a customer. And I wondered, where you think that's going. Is that going to fall under what people would consider to be a CDP umbrella, or is that gonna fall under ERP and then branch out into what people think of as CDPs, right? So what are those lines in fact going to blur? Because first-party data is becoming more and more important as the third-party cookie depreciates, and as we lose mobile IDs, which we haven't lost them entirely, but it's looking less than optimal with regards to
yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. I think that certainly we felt like one of the great unfulfilled promises of legacy data platforms, so primarily like the DMPs, is that they only ever addressed like a single channel and really a single use case, right? Which was to improve ad targeting across paid ads, right? And not to say that that's not important. It is, but when you think about the artifact that is created as a result of people going to your site and to your app and engaging with your digital properties, that same data is used by the analytics team. It's used by the customer support team. It's used by the product team. It's used by the engineering team. It's used by the marketing team. And within each of those teams, you have different parts of those teams that may be siloed from one another, and you have to start thinking less reactively and more holistically. And so, like, I think one of the things that happens inside really any organization is as you get successful, you have the individual teams and functions start to self-organize and optimize, and they all have their individual data consumption requirements and the tools that they want to use to do their job, right? And so you have a bunch of data being created and data kind of moving around, but nobody's managing it holistically. And that's fine, but you get to this point where there's this entropy that is like slowly forming, and it's creating this like this really strong gravity. And every company gets to this point where it's like you need to systematize your business, right? And usually it arises when somebody asks a question that requires the unification of various subsets of data that are in different tools, and nobody can answer the question because the data is trapped. It's on these like data islands. And so then you have to figure out like, all right, well, can I answer this question? Should I even ask it? Because it's going to require a lot of work for me to be able to get this. And so a lot of the like what the CDP does is it enables business process transformation, right? So change management and embracing new ways of doing things are like that's the big hurdle that we're helping our customers overcome. Now, there's no shortage of like tactical use cases as it relates to like first party data. I don't think that the value of first party data has ever really been in question. I think like it was really about scale. And I think that with like the third party ecosystem so readily available, I think to be honest, I think people developed a lot of bad habits. They're like, oh, it's too tough to get my first party data foundation in order. It's easier just to be really reactive. And so, well, I'll just kind of like call it what it is, and then I'll dump a bunch of third party data on top of it and kind of easy button, you get scale, right? And it's good to see that the change that has been forced upon everybody by the big platform owners like Apple and Google is actually kind of forcing them to do the right things and to build the necessary foundation that'll allow them to scale in a more healthy way.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was having a conversation earlier today about how Google, to some extent, forces web design and web developers to do the right thing as well, because they use SEO as a carrot and a stick at the same time. Like if you don't create a great user experience with core web vitals, you're not going to rank, right? And so
That's right.
you might have rested on your laurels with an 8-year-old website, but now if you do that, you're invisible, right? So
Totally.
from that perspective, it's interesting to see the platforms, the double-edged sword of the power that they wield, right, and how it ends up manifesting. I think the way you described sort of the late epiphany of the brands, like, okay, I have to get my data house in order, particularly first-party data at this point. It seems like it might lead to sort of a little bit of a digital data divide, right? The data haves and the data have-nots, because data is more informative when you reach statistical validity, right? And so the smaller the marketer, the more challenging it is to really know what's going on, right? Obviously, once you get the SMBs, you're really completely clueless, except for a few of your channels, which are also typically siloed, and you're lucky if you've got a HubSpot or some kind of CRM. But even for the mid-sized companies, right, for them to come to the same learnings that a larger brand could in the same category could come at, it's going to take them a lot longer. Do they have a place within the sort of CDP ecosystem using the same tool sets that the big brands would use? Can they be equally successful, right? Maybe they're a little more nimble actually than some of the bigger brands, because they can, it's not a committee that makes a decision. Maybe it's a person, right, as opposed to a committee. So they can maybe pull the trigger on something more easily. Can they catch up, or are they sort of forever stuck with less data and less accurate data?
It's a really good point. And I think that digital divide, which is, it's really the same as like success to the successful, which you see in systems theory, right? It requires you starting to map the business and how the business is instrumented, and to try to create some sort of flywheel effect where you have the necessary feedback loops and information is flowing freely throughout the organization so that the system can learn from itself and continue to improve from itself. So there's no kind of like structural digital divide just based on size of the company. Size is usually a representation of maybe maturity and expertise. But I think every company gets to a point where they have to start thinking about like, how do I evolve the things that I was doing that maybe didn't scale? And look, all small businesses have to do things that don't scale. It's actually a great thing. It's one of the, I think, best tools that small companies have. But at some point, you have to move into a different mode of operating, and you have to say, like, how do I do things that do scale, right? And it's kind of like moving from analog to digital, right? Things have to become predictable and repeatable. And the thing that you have to nail to be able to execute that successfully is your data flows, right? What is the data strategy? What is the desired schema? How am I protecting that? How is the information that is created around the business of conducting business brought into the organization? How is that information analyzed? How is the results of that analysis disseminated? What's the process that's built around it? Because all businesses are just systems. There's inputs and there's outputs, and the information that flows is powered by the raw data, and it's got to be transformed so that ultimately you have these kind of compounding effects, right? It has to be that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and the companies that do that really well grow, and they grow really fast. And any company can do it. It's just about how strong you are at being able to ingest that signal and transform inputs into output.
Do you feel like pure plays versus, let's say for retail, for example, do you feel like multi-channel versus pure play have advantages or disadvantages to data collection and data centralization? Or do you feel like it's pretty much a level playing field if you've got a decent POS, for example, and you can sort of glue things together?
It comes down to customer experience, right? Do you provide meaningful value to your customers that allows them or creates the demand from them and drives them to engage and to engage more regularly, right? And the more data that you get, the better the output should be, right? Like there's a reason why Google and their search engine is exponentially better than everything else out there, right? It's because of the data advantages that are created, right? And it is the same notion, success to the successful. But here's what I would say is, I think especially in the wake of COVID, I think three things are true for every brand. Maybe four things. Like every brand has to have a strong digital presence, right? You just like it's not a luxury anymore. I think the past, call it 15, 18 months has showed us that it's a matter of like necessity and survival, right? And if you're going to embrace that, then definitely the three following things are true. You're going to have data silos, right? You're going to have multiple places where data is created. You're going to have multiple parts of the business where data is consumed and resides. And you're probably going to have some level of asymmetry in your data sets, right? Especially if you're taking a very like reactive tools-based approach, and you don't have a coherent data strategy. And so with that, you're going to have data quality issues, right? So that's the first thing. The second one is if you are in business and you're transacting in some way, shape, or form digitally, like you probably want to abide by the law, right? So you have to adhere to regulation like GDPR and CCPA, or you're completely at risk, right? And then the last part is, despite I think what some of the larger companies in the space may want people to believe, nobody standardizes to any one single vendor or suite, right? Because the analytics team may want one tool, the marketing team may want a different tool, the customer support team may want a completely different tool, and that's good. That's okay. They should do those things. To try to like impose a single suite that's an amalgamation of like the past decade of acquisitions that were maybe like loosely integrated or not really integrated at all. Nobody's really kind of buying into that. So you have a need to be able to integrate data across lots of different places, getting data to those vendors and back from those vendors, and centralize it and just kind of make it all free flowing. And if you believe in those three things, like you have to look at those as really fundamental and really structural challenges that need to be solved in order to achieve scale. And I don't know if that necessarily maps to like a pure play or not, but I think it is fairly universal in nature.
Right. You know, a lot of folks, in conversations that I have with them about their data, they often come from an analytics perspective, right? So they're only thinking about one-way data flow,
Right.
data in, not data back out again. And I think that's really an area where people are having difficulty wrapping their head around, like, okay, I have to not only think about data from a data collection and standardization perspective, but I have to think about now that once I can have something I can do, some actionable, data output, how do I get that back to where it can work hardest for me? How does that factor into your product roadmap and your educational role, right? Obviously, your sales teams are out there basically, in some cases, taking these people who really have a one-way vision of how data works, and they have to have that epiphany, right, where they start to think about data more holistically. So, what's the catalyst for them to sort of bring them around to have them thinking differently about data?
Yeah, I mean, look, the individual consumers of data who think a very specific way about their data consumption needs, like they're just doing their job, right? Like you can't blame the analytics guy for not being focused on, say, customer support, or the marketer for not being focused on, whatever else, right? Data engineer. Everybody's gonna self-organize and self-optimize, and that's fine until it's not. And that's where you need that that holistic approach to customer data management, right? Because each of those tools has an individual subset of information about how users are engaging. But when you think about like getting to that, like what I think people broadly refer to as like that unified customer view, it's a composite of the various subsets of data that creates like the relevant superset of data. And how do we get people to start thinking more holistically about it? There's usually some sort of tipping point. It may be that one team has a need for more data. It may be a team wants to swap out an integration. It may be that they want to run a bake-off between multiple different vendors, or they need to get data out of one system and over to another system reliably. And so much of like customer data is it requires the necessary treatment and organization of it, right? So like tools like Zapier, where it's just like you're moving like raw event level data, like that's not enough. right? It has to be managed and merged into the right profiles, and it has to be structured properly, and you need that bidirectional connectivity, and you need extensibility in your data model and in your approach to integrations. And you don't get that with like, the I mean, don't get me wrong, like companies like Zapier are awesome, but just not for this one thing.
It doesn't solve this problem. Yeah.
No, it definitely doesn't. So you get to this point where there's usually like the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it's typically somebody on the product team that says, because they have the bird's eye view of the demands from the business and the resource constraints from like the engineering team, right? And it's kind of like just a supply and demand thing. And they're saying, all right, we need this data infrastructure in place to be able to satisfy the current and future state needs of the business, while also protecting the time of the engineering team so that they don't have to manually support, integrate, and maintain all of these different tools that are used across the business. So it's like this kind of future-proofing / simplification layer that just allows everybody to be more efficient.
So if there's somebody in the C-suite, it could be one of several different roles in the C-suite, and they sort of feel like they want to be the catalyst, right, to sort of get this rolling, but they want the buy-in from the various teams. Do you recommend they form a committee? Do you recommend they be proactive and essentially lead the teams individually, to the water and let them drink, or because I feel like there are a lot of businesses that haven't reached that straw breaking their camel back yet, right?
Yeah.
Yet they still have the need. They may just not have had the epiphany, right? And so if a person's in the C-suite there and they sort of have a sneaking suspicion, like, okay, there's a lot of opportunity being left on the table because we don't have a holistic unified data strategy, and they want to be that catalyst, but they don't want to cram it down everybody's throat. Like what? Because it ends up being almost as much a political strategy for them as it is,
Oh, for sure,
in engineering.
Yeah.
Problem.
Yeah. And change management is hard, right? Because you're met with a bunch of resistance from, a variety of sources internally. So, we see a couple things. So I think we've championed this notion of data as a team sport for the past few years, because it's not just about the marketers' needs. It's not just about the product team's needs, or the engineering team's needs, or the analytics team's needs. It's about all of it, right? Like it's about that holistic approach to customer data. And so in some organizations, there's like a chief data officer. Sometimes it's a chief digital officer, but more often than not, because not every company has a chief data officer or chief digital officer, it's usually coming out of the product org, because that's typically, especially within organizations who identify themselves as like software companies. I mean, that is kind of the nerve center of the business.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a tech-centric company will approach this differently than a 100-year-old company in any other sector.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, it was. Are there any sort of any final pearls of wisdom that you think people should absorb when they if they have a nagging suspicion that that final straw is coming pretty soon and they want to get ahead of it?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, if you're there, if you're kind of getting to the point where you think a CDP can help, there's no shortage of companies that are identifying themselves as CDPs these days, and I think you you alluded to it earlier on. I think there's a lot of clarity that's needed within the ecosystem. Some companies, they look at the user data store as a feature to power the application that they own. Sometimes that's going to be in the execution layer. So maybe like it's email delivery or marketing automation. Sometimes it may be kind of like meta reporting layer on top of your marketing tech tools. Not to say that those types of CDPs are not valuable. I think that they are valuable. They're limited in scope. They tend to solve one specific use case. I think the way that we view the role of the CDP, though, is what it really should be is less at the application layer and more at the infrastructure layer. It should be built on a completely neutral, partner agnostic approach, right? Your data as a brand is your data, doesn't belong to us. We are a platform, and our job is to help accelerate time to data value. And so it becomes really misaligned when you start to extend into the application layer and you say like, well, I'll power a set of connectors for most of it, but I need to really own this, kind of like vertically integrated part of the ecosystem. It's just a weird kind of misalignment. And so I think the things that people need to focus on when they think about, do I need a customer data platform or not? It's like, is this tool agnostic? Can it ingest data from anywhere? Can it get data to anywhere? And does it solve the structural challenges that maybe inhibit or prevent success at scale? And those things are data quality, like I mentioned, and the kind of default state of data quality is reverse, right? It's not like you fix it once and then it's like magically fixed forever, right? Governance, right? So it's one thing to get everything into like the right state and merged into the right profiles and have like a clean, hygienic data set. But if you can't govern your data flows and you're subjecting your organization to a bunch of liability, that's also not great. And then the connectivity piece. You should be able to get data from anywhere to anywhere, and those are the things that the CDP should be able to do for you. And there's there will be an evolution. I think that there's a really important setup that creates for a lot of companies to then focus on automation and decisioning and intelligence. But so many of these like advanced data services, call it ML, AI, predictive insights, whatever, they skip past the structural steps. They skip past data quality. They skip past governance and data sovereignty issues. And it's like, you're just dealing with garbage in, garbage out. And you have to, it's not the sexy stuff, but it's the stuff that really makes a difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All points well taken. It really sounds like anyone in the market for a CDP should take a deep breath, educate themselves, and really think about their organization and data needs holistically before they start even meeting with a salesperson, right? Because otherwise they'll get shiny object syndrome and end up getting sold something they don't need.
That's right. Yeah, and no tool by itself, no platform will solve all your problems. It is about the process that you build into using the tool, and how does that enable a better, faster, bigger way of doing things, right? And so so much I think of anytime you're dealing with new technology, it's like people get kind of so wrapped up in just like solutioning around like the tool, but it's like, how do you embrace the new way of doing things? And that change management, like I said before, is it's tough. And so my advice is make sure you have the right people around the table from like a true partnership perspective, and you're not just dealing with a company that wants to like throw the technology over the wall and say like, hey, go knock yourself out. And that's maybe it's a third party, maybe it's the vendor like mParticle itself, maybe it's somebody else, but just make sure that you have clear alignment around like people, platform, and process.
Cool. Well, I think that's a wise strategy for anybody embarking, because the last thing they want to do is have to replace their CDP, because that's probably as bad, if not worse, than having made the wrong decision and the having not done anything at all. So
Totally.
I look forward to keeping track of what you guys are up to, and it was I appreciate you sharing your vision, your sort of data vision and holistic data vision with me and with us.
Yeah, it's been fun. Been good to catch up.
Likewise. Thanks.